Amara was 23 years old when the iron touched her skin, and in that moment the life she had known ended without ceremony. 6 days earlier, she had lived in the kingdom of Dahomey as a wife, a mother, and a skilled weaver whose cloth moved along trade routes linking villages and kingdoms. Her work was known, her hands steady, her days shaped by labor that carried meaning. She had borne 2 children and carried a third. She walked through her community with the confidence of someone whose place in the world was understood, whose future, while never guaranteed, was at least imaginable. That world collapsed when the raiders came. They arrived with speed and organization, moving through villages as part of a system that had been refined over years. Homes were burned, men were killed or bound, women and children seized. Amara's children were pulled from her arms in the chaos, carried away in another direction. She screamed their names until her voice failed, until the distance swallowed them. She never saw them again. In the days that followed, she and dozens of other women were marched toward the coast, bound together by rope, fed little, beaten when they slowed. Some women collapsed on the road and were left behind. Others were killed as examples. By the time they reached the beach, exhaustion had dulled even fear. Fires burned near the shoreline, and iron brands were heated until they glowed. One by one, the women were pushed forward. When the iron pressed into Amara's chest, the pain erased thought. The letters burned into her flesh marked her as property of the Royal African Company. The mark did not record her name, her lineage, or her history. It replaced them. A European trader walked along the line, inspecting the women as goods. He checked teeth, limbs, eyes. He noted health, strength, and pregnancy. The child Amara carried did not protect her. It increased her value. Offshore waited a ship, its hull rising from the water like a fortress. Painted on its side was its name, Henrietta Marie. Boats ferried 47 women from the beach to the ship. Below deck, hundreds of men were already chained in darkness, packed into spaces designed for cargo, not people. The women were not taken below. They were kept on deck, where fresh air increased survival rates and where access was easy. As the anchor lifted and the shoreline disappeared, the middle passage began. Life aboard the Henrietta Marie followed a rigid rhythm governed by absolute power. The ship was a floating world ruled by the captain and enforced by the crew. Below deck, men lay shackled shoulder to shoulder, barely able to move. The air was foul, thick with breath and sickness. Disease spread quickly. Each morning, bodies were brought up and thrown into the sea, their lives reduced to losses calculated against profit. The women slept on deck, shackled at the ankles to iron rings set into the planks. They were fed just enough to remain alive, given water measured carefully. During the day, they were allowed movement not as kindness but as investment because bodies that could move sold for higher prices. The sun burned their skin. Salt spray cracked their lips. At night, the atmosphere changed. The work of sailing slowed. Rum was distributed. Voices grew louder. Sailors moved toward the women openly without secrecy. Officers knew. Captains permitted it. Ship logs recorded these practices in vague language that reduced human suffering to routine custom. Amara learned the system by watching. She learned which men were most dangerous, which could sometimes be avoided, which patterns repeated night after night. She learned where to place herself on the deck, when to appear weak, and when to appear invisible. She learned that survival often depended on reading moods, on anticipating movement, on understanding that the rules of the ship were designed to protect profit, not people. She also learned she was not alone. Despite fear, exhaustion, and language barriers, the women formed connections. They did not all share words, but they shared understanding. An older woman named Neka emerged as a quiet center. Neka had survived captivity before and carried knowledge no one wished to possess but many needed. She taught others how to endure, how to tend injuries with salt water and cloth, how to protect the mind when the body could not be protected. She taught them that despair was as deadly as disease, that women who stopped eating or responding often did not survive the voyage. The women helped one another swallow food when grief made it unbearable. They shared water when sickness came. They sat with those who withdrew into silence, holding hands, offering presents when nothing else was possible. They exchanged fragments of language, gestures, songs hummed softly at dawn. This network mattered. Historical records show that women who formed social bonds survived at higher rates than those who remained isolated. Ship doctors noted it without understanding it. Traders observed it as coincidence. They did not recognize solidarity when they saw it. Amara became part of this network. She counted days, tracked deaths, noticed patterns, and shared what she learned. When illness spread, she helped care for the sick. When despair took hold of a woman who stared at the sea as if considering escape into it, Amara and others stayed close, blocking moments of opportunity when possible, reminding her through touch that she was still among the living. Amara learned how to retreat inward, holding onto memories of her village, the sound of looms, the faces of her children, the feeling of belonging. She learned to separate her sense of self from what was being done to her body. Survival became a discipline practiced hour by hour. Endurance became resistance. Weeks passed measured by sunrises and deaths. Storms battered the ship. The women clung to the deck as waves washed over them. Some were injured, some were lost. Below deck, the sounds of men coughing and crying rose through the planks. The ship stank of sickness and fear. When land finally appeared on the horizon after 47 days, some women wept, others felt only numbness. Jamaica. By the time the ship reached port, nearly a third of those who had boarded were dead, a loss considered acceptable by the standards of the trade. The survivors were prepared for sail. Their bodies were washed, their hair oiled, signs of illness concealed where possible. The marks of chains and suffering were treated as inconveniences to be hidden. At auction, buyers inspected them as they had been inspected on the beach. Amara was sold to a plantation owner who valued her pregnancy and her apparent strength. She was taken inland, away from the coast, away from the sea that had both threatened and spared her. Plantation life introduced a new rhythm of labor and punishment. The work was relentless. The heat was crushing. Overseers measured days in output and pain. Months later, Amara gave birth to a daughter. She named her Adawar, daughter of all, a name that carried memory of the women who had helped her survive the crossing, the collective strength that had kept her alive. Amara never returned to Africa. She never reunited with her first children. She lived the rest of her life enslaved, reduced in records to labor and property, counted in ledgers as inventory. But she endured. She raised children, shared knowledge learned on the deck of a ship, taught others how to endure loss without surrendering identity. She became part of informal networks on the plantation, women helping women, passing on strategies for survival, for care, for resistance that did not always look like rebellion but was rebellion nonetheless. The networks formed during the Middle Passage did not disappear. They adapted. They spread across plantations and generations, carried in whispered advice, in shared labor, in acts of care that defied a system built to isolate. The Henrietta Marie itself did not last. Years later, it sank off the coast of Florida. When it was discovered centuries afterward, archaeologists recovered shackles, trade goods, the ship's bell that confirmed its name. They did not recover the suffering of the women. That history survives in documents, in testimony, in patterns repeated across hundreds of voyages, in what was minimized, euphemized, or excluded from traditional accounts. The Atlantic slave trade was not only an economic system. It was a system built on the systematic exploitation of human bodies, particularly those of women, whose experiences were often erased even when slavery itself was acknowledged. Amara's story is not unique. It stands for millions whose names were not recorded, whose endurance was assumed, whose suffering was treated as background. Remembering her is about truth, about acknowledging what was done, what was endured, and what survived. The Middle Passage was not only a journey of death, it was also a journey of resistance, carried forward quietly by women who refused to disappear, whose survival shaped generations that followed, whose humanity persisted in a world determined to deny it.